Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Winter is here, so I wanted to take a look at some games that celebrate one of the few enjoyable things to do in the cold, snowboarding. I've only been snowboarding once a good few years ago and I really enjoyed it, but it mostly ended up like this. There are a fair few games knocking around, and it seems that they were definitely more prevalent in the early 2000s when everything had to be extreme. So yeah, we're going to take a look at a bunch of games that take skateboarding and takes off the wheels. And yeah, I know that's not how it works. Anyway, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. Oh, and please keep in mind, most of these games have a licensed soundtrack, so the music you're going to get is going to be generic royalty-free stuff. Sorry. Let's start on the Nintendo 64 with 1080 Snowboarding. I remember getting this game after phoning around a lot of my local shops and all of them being sold out. Not entirely sure why it was so popular, but man, I was excited to get it. Now, the premise of basically all the games we're going to see here is the same, so there's really no need to dwell. It's a snowboarding game where you choose to either race people or do tricks, which is basically all you really need in a snowboarding game. In this one, you choose from a handful of characters, each of which have their own stats, and get used to me saying that. Then you choose from either racing people or doing tricks, as I mentioned, but be warned, this game isn't for the faint of heart. There's 3 levels to choose from, each of which has a handful of tracks to race on. You race against a single opponent and just have to win the race to proceed. Winning the levels unlocks new tracks, boards, gear and characters. But it's not easy. In fact, it's really bloody hard, and I can't believe I used to be good at this game. There's a pretty decent variety in courses, and you'll be sliding down mountains, through towns, over frozen lakes in forests and more. Of course, there's obstacles all over the place as well, as some tight twists and turns that you will need to navigate. This can actually be really hard to do, thanks to the controls though. Now, the controls aren't bad, well, sort of. It's just that the game requires you to be very precise, and you can almost see this as more of a simulation than an arcade-style racer. Any small bump in the snow can be enough to send you flying, and when you make a jump, you really have to land properly with very little margin for error. This is a game that you need to practice with and get good at, but when you do, it is very rewarding. You can crouch to build up speed and jump whenever you like. Every time your board leaves the ground, you have to make sure you align it correctly with the floor or you'll take a tumble. If you land too far forwards or back or sideways, then you'll lose your balance and wipe out. This will definitely happen a hell of a lot in the first few hours of playing the game. To make it a bit more annoying, the computer opponents rarely make mistakes, and coming back to this game after not playing it for years, it took me nearly 10 tries just to win the first race, which I am fairly certain was the case when I first got the game. It is punishing. It doesn't help that you have a damage meter as well, which fills up as you race, get it to the top, and you're out and have to start again. The races themselves though can be really fun, as the controls for actually racing are responsive and it is quite smooth, running at a half decent frame rate most of the time. You get a few tries to win races, though if you do fail 3 times, it's back to the first race. You also have a trick mode where you can do regular tracks to see what sort of scores you can get on them, and they will have ramps to jump off of or things to grind on that you can take advantage of. There's also a half pipe level where you can select which acts as kind of like a training stage. This is very handy for learning the trick controls, which, I'll be honest, are pretty terrible these days. Doing grabs is easy, as it's just the press of a button, but to do any spins you have to press the R button and a direction on the stick. To do a 360, you've got to press R and spin the stick 360 degrees. And doing things like a 1080, there's a ridiculous combination of the R button, rotating the stick, pressing R again, rotating the stick again, pressing B and stick it up your ass. It is needlessly complicated, and I don't think I've ever got it to work. The best I think I've managed to do is a 900. Now, it kind of seems like I hate this game, which in some ways I do, but I'd also know from experience that if I was to put the time back in and get used to it all over again, I would have a blast. This is a good game with some really cool racing, but I'd say it's hard to recommend these days as it's just not friendly for beginners, and it's definitely not a pick up and play game. But if you do like snowboarding and think you're hard enough, then give this a go. 1080 got a sequel on the Gamecube, 1080 Avalanche, and this was my first time playing it. In terms of gameplay, it is pretty much the same as the N64 game. You choose from a bunch of characters, which, kinda like the wave race games and the 1080 game before this, are instantly forgettable, but do the job. Some return from the first game, and again they have their own stats, and you'll find one that you'll like soon enough. As before, you choose from a few game modes. There's Match Race, which is where you'll need to race one-on-one against the other characters, unlocking more things as you go. Then there's Gate Race, where you have to board through a series of gates before the time runs out, miss too many or let the timer run out and it's game over. Then there's Trick Mode and Time Trial, which is great for practicing courses. And I have to say that in terms of pick up and play, this is a hell of an improvement over the N64 game. It's still a tough game, but here it's tough for the right reasons. In match races, you'll face a series of one-on-one races, and these are a lot of fun. The courses are much bigger and wider, with plenty going on in them. You'll have the usual hazards of rocks, trees, ramps and various snow-based equipment, but you also have to watch out for local wildlife and even other people, skiers and boarders. If you're not careful, you'll get a face full of Barry the Ski Man. Thankfully though, this game is infinitely more forgiving with your balance, and doing tricks is much easier with simple button commands. Holding the R button in the air lets you rotate whichever way the stick is held, and combining this with other buttons does a variety of grabs. Pressing R when you're not in the air makes you crouch, which also acts as a boost. Doing tricks builds up your boost meter, or power meter as they call it, and if this power meter reaches the top after some pretty sweet tricks, then you'll start to glow. When you're like this, if you hit something that would normally make you crash and fall over, instead you just bust through and lose your shine, so it's kind of like a free hit. This is a really cool feature and helps out massively in races and can actually be used tactically to take the lead by smashing through a tree or something rather than trying to go around it. Something that I struggle to get used to though is that you can't just hold the jump button down as long as you want to and let go. Here, when you press it, you only have a second or two to let go before you just stand up again. What I do like though is that if you land a bit wonky, you'll sometimes have the opportunity to correct yourself so you don't fall on your ass. This is kind of strange, but again, it's something that I just needed to get used to, and this is my first time playing. You do have a few practice areas for tricks and time trials, which are worth spending a bit of time with. Graphically, I really like how it looks. There's usually a lot going on in the courses, and it moves at a fast pace with an excellent frame rate. I can't think of any times I had any slowdown. As with a lot of snowboarding games, some of the courses can look a bit similar, but it's kind of forgivable. Then there's also the titular avalanches, which happen on certain times. These are pretty cool and really keep you on your toes while you're racing. This is still a tricky game though, with the computer opponents not giving you much of a chance, but it is a much easier game to pick up and play, and I had lots of fun playing this one. Definitely one I'll be going back to, and I would recommend if you like snowboarding games that are a bit more grounded in reality, but not quite. Coolboarders on the PlayStation 1 was a pretty popular series. This one here is Coolboarders 2, which is often touted as the best in the series. You know what to expect here. You choose from a bunch of tood-filled characters and you hit the slopes in a series of races or trick attacks. As you'd expect, the courses range from mountains, villages, forests and the such. Though the courses do a good job of having enough variety in them, at least the handful that I saw of them did. As you start racing, you can pull off tricks, but these don't really help you in any way during the races, and are only really useful in trick modes, so I would normally recommend not bothering with them for the most part. That's if you can get the tricks to work in the first place. Now, I do understand that these games require practice, but I could very rarely get any of the tricks to work, and like 1080 on the N64, a lot of the inputs were needlessly complicated, requiring you to press a direction as well as two other buttons just for a simple grab. As far as I can tell, you have to do the input once you've left the ground, and can't be preemptively holding a button or direction, which is a bit annoying. Or maybe I was just doing it wrong, it's quite possible. It didn't take long before I gave up on tricks altogether. The problem with that though is that when you start a championship, where you unlock new courses and content, is that the first thing you do is tricks off of a massive ramp. The more points you get, the better your starting position in the upcoming race. This is a kind of cool idea, but it meant that I started almost every race about 20 seconds behind everybody else and never stood a chance of catching up. As far as I can tell, the computer opponents are pretty tough to beat, though I didn't really see them enough to make a proper informed decision. Graphically, the game is okay. There is a lot going on in the courses, but the character models are a bit ropey, and they do that thing where your limbs just come away from the body. However, the slightly crappy graphics mean that the game does always run at a very good frame rate, and it's nice and colourful, which I like. It's a real shame that the controls just pretty much suck. You press down to crouch, which makes you go faster, and then you do the crazy button combinations for tricks. Turning can be very tough though, but you have to remember you've got to press square when doing any sharp turns. Once you get used to this, it is much more manageable. Sadly, I just didn't have a very good time with this one. Even the licensed soundtrack got on my nerves with some pretty crappy tracks. Now, I will hold my hands up and say that I know this is probably a case of me just not being able to play the game properly, and I should check out the instructions and practice properly, but nothing about the game made me want to go and do that. There were 4 Coolboarders games for the PS1 and then another one on the PS2, and apparently Coolboarders 2 here is the best, so I'm not that fussed about checking out the rest of the series, but you never know. I think this was probably a great game at the time of its release, but it really hasn't aged well if you ask me. Another PS1 title is the imaginatively named Snowboarding, a budget game from A1, who popped up a few times in my PS1 Hidden Gems series for anyone that watched those. As was the case with a few of the A1 games I played, Snowboarding is a perfectly functional but instantly forgettable title. Being a budget game, it is quite bare bones. There's 3 characters to choose from, each of which have a couple of colour schemes as well as the usual stat differences. Then you choose from what is actually a surprisingly large number of courses. There's 27 in total, well, sort of. The game takes place on the same mountain, and as you complete races and events, new routes and starting points are unlocked for you to choose from. So really it's only the first couple of minutes of a track that are different, and by the time you get to the end you're always on the same bit. But that's actually a thing that happens in a few snowboarding games, I think. If you choose the race mode, you can either do it on your own or against the other 2 characters, and it's actually kind of fun. The computer characters are a fair challenge, being perfectly beatable while not always being perfect, so if you do mess up, then you do have a chance to catch up. You can do tricks, though there's really no point in race mode as you don't get points and they don't seem to do anything else. There's no boosts or special abilities here, just a few grabs that you can do. When you're racing, you can't even do any spin tricks. What's really strange though is that you can't actually even fall over here. No matter what you do, you will always land. You can land sideways, holding a trick till you touch the ground, none of it matters, you will never fall over ever. And I do actually kind of like that. This is kind of like a my first snowboarding game. It would be a half decent way to get someone used to controls and snowboarding games. And the controls themselves are actually quite responsive, and I never felt like the game wasn't doing what I asked it to. You do also have a dedicated trick mode. Here you'll get a prompt flash on the screen when you can do a trick. Then all you have to do is press X and you'll automatically do some cool spins and more advanced tricks, and this time you do get points for them. There's even markers on the screen for where you can do the bigger tricks, but it tends to be that any edge will let you do something cool. It is very simple, but it does actually work. Again, you still can't fall over, and it's all about being able to time your button presses correctly. At first I was disappointed, but actually by the end I was into it. The graphics aren't going to impress anyone here. It looks very basic with some very jaggedy edges, and sometimes the characters do look a bit dumb. Also, there's just no variety in the courses, being just one large one, and there's a fair bit of pop-in and dodgy textures. But it does run smoothly, and the controls are responsive, which is really what matters in a racing game. Overall, this actually isn't a bad game at all. It's definitely not going to blow anyone away, but it's a budget game that does what it sets out to do quite well. It would be perfect for a younger gamer or someone who hasn't played many games to help them get started. Oh, and also, the soundtrack is surprisingly awesome. Over to the original Xbox now for Amped 2, which is a really cool snowboarding game that runs a fine line between arcade style action and simulation style controls, and it works very well. You make your own character from a preset template of basically gender and skin colour, and then you hit a variety of slopes, each of which have a number of objectives for you to complete. It's sort of set out like a Tony Hawk game. You choose your course, and then you have to do tricks to reach certain score milestones, as well as just regular scores though. You also have photographers at various parts of the course. When you see one of them, you've got to try and do your best tricks to impress them and get another set of high scores, which is pretty cool. The tracks also get you to do certain tricks, or certain number of tricks on them, and there's gaps for you to find and jump over, and the most fun, and probably frustrating, are the damn snowmen that are hidden around every course. You've got to find them and ram into them. You'll know when one is nearby as it will be laughing at you and taunting you, but being a snowboarding game you can't go back, so if you do go past it you just have to start again and hope you get it, even if you miss it just by an inch or two. Tough luck, go back and do it again. but actually playing the game is loads of fun and you won't really mind. But again, it is one that you'll need to practice at before you get some of the crazy high scores. By completing objectives in the courses, you'll unlock even more to race on, as well as earn stat points that you can add to your character however you see fit. You can improve things like your speed, jump height, balance or spin for easier tricks. This really gives you more incentive to go back to levels and complete all the missions. You'll also earn sponsors as you play, and these guys will give you prizes in the forms of items you can equip. Some are stupid things like a pizza, but you'll also get new gear which is handy. The sponsors have certain tricks that they like to see as well, so you've got to make sure you do the stuff that they like to keep them sweet. Eventually you'll unlock some proper races where you'll race against a few other opponents and will have to either be the first to the bottom of the course or be the one with the highest score by the time you get there. These are pretty tough, but with a bit of practice you can do it. The controls here can take a bit to get used to, but actually are really good. You use the left and right sticks to control your rotation as well as where you grab your board, so combining these is how you pull tricks off. You also have a button to do grinds or lip tricks. But the game doesn't always reward the biggest, best tricks. There is also a focus on how well you pull the trick off. For example, you could do a 900 melon but not land it quite so smoothly, but then do a 360 tail grab but do it nice and slow and smooth with a clean turn and land perfectly, and you get way more points. I really like this, as it makes you focus on quality not quantity, and means that you don't risk doing crazy tricks on smaller jumps, but can still just get as high a score. Graphically, the game is excellent. It is backwards compatible on the Xbox 360, which is what I'm playing it on here, and it looks great, and it could even get away with being an early 360 game if you ask me. It's clean and crisp, and the courses all look great with plenty going on and lots of other people on them for you to avoid. If you're into snowboarding or just fun games, then this is one that I would definitely recommend. Time for some real action now with Heavy Shreddin on the NES, which is the earliest snowboarding game that I could find, and surprisingly, it's pretty fun. Heavy Shredding is an interesting one, as the game is played from a side-on perspective and plays more like an endless runner platform game, except it's not endless. You take off down one of 3 mountains, each of which are divided into a few sections, and really your main goal is just to make it to the bottom within the time limit. There's plenty of things to avoid, like trees, rocks, other racers, and even traffic and animals at certain points. Controlling your bloke is easy. You move up and down, and can slow down by holding left on the D-pad or right to speed up a little bit. Going slower also lets you do sharper turns. You also have a jump and a crouch button, which you'll need to use to avoid some of the hazards. As you get to certain points of the mountain, you might have to do different things. Sometimes you just have to beat the time limit, other times you have to make it through a small gate in a slalom, and other times you have to avoid other people skiing down the hill. It sounds easy enough, but it's really not, and you'll need a lot of memorization here. Hazards pop up quite quickly, and it helps to be able to remember where they are, though to be fair, your character is always pretty far to the left of the screen, so you do get a fair bit of warning. The collision detection can feel a bit wonky at times though. Now this could be partly down to the viewpoint, but there was quite a few times where I'd fall over because I just clipped a tree or was too close to something that I shouldn't have been. Normally this wouldn't be too much of an issue, however here, every time you fall over, you go back to the start of whichever mountain section you're at, which can be pretty annoying. You never get up where you fell down. Also, you can only fall down 3 times before it's game over. There's no continues, just back to the very start for you. But I guess when you have memorised it all, you'd be able to get through the whole game in probably about half an hour. It's not something you'll be doing on your first try though, and at first it kind of feels a bit frustrating, but after a few minutes I found myself actually really enjoying my time with it. The graphics are bright and colourful, and it looks decent enough for the NES. It's got some very smooth scrolling, which really helps. And that's really all there is to it. It's a pretty simple game, but I've got to say for such an early one, it's surprisingly good, and I'd say it is well worth adding to your collection for a bit of winter fun. Here is Dark Summit for the Gamecube, and if you're after something a little different, then this might be the game for you. Also released for the Xbox and PlayStation 2, there is a bit of story here, where you are a snowboarder, shock, and you are on Mount Garrick, which has been taken over by a military occupation, and they hate snowboarders. Skiing's fine though. Oh, and also they've set up a whole load of bombs on the mountain to blow it to bits and cause an avalanche. You're having none of this and are contacted by some bloke who asks for your help in getting rid of all the stupid military people and of course the bombs. To do this, you snowboard down the mountain, which is full of different paths and secret areas. On the way you'll see some comms gates highlighted. Go through one of these and you'll be given a mission. These range from doing tricks, hitting the score and that sort of thing, to doing things like defusing bombs by ramming into them, collecting items, knocking over skiers, or sometimes avoiding the ski police. None of them are very serious, and the game has a really good tone and sense of humour, playing up to its ridiculousness. Completing missions gets you lift points, and you need a certain amount of these to get access to new areas of the mountain where you have even more missions to complete. You can do loads of tricks here as well, and the controls are really great, easily letting you pull off grabs, flips and grinds. You also have super moves that you can do by pressing button combinations while in the air. These give you massive points, and you can find icons to collect on the mountains that give you even more super moves to do. Doing tricks gives you points, which you'll use to unlock new gear like boards and costumes. As you progress, you'll also unlock a load of new characters to play as, who, yep, have their own stats, and it's a lot of fun doing all the missions and watching the silly cutscenes here. Graphically, the game looks really good. There's always loads going on all over the place, and there's a decent amount of detail on just about everything, and some really smooth animation and, more importantly, a really smooth frame rate. The game runs very well here, and I never saw any slowdown. This is a game that I never hear anyone talking about, and I nearly didn't bother playing it, but I'm so glad I did. I had an absolute blast playing through this one, and would recommend it to anyone. It is a total hidden gem. Snowboard Kids for the N64 could be described as Mario Kart on snow, and I think that would tell you all you need to know. This is a game that I've had for years, and it's one I go back to quite often when I dust off the old girl, and it really is kind of like Mario Kart on snow. You only have 5 characters to choose from here, all with the usual stats, and there is actually one more that can be unlocked by getting a gold medal in all of the races. You can also choose from a few boards, some favour speed, some turning and some tricks. Then you choose from only 6 tracks, with one more being unlockable with all those gold medals that you'll be getting, and yep, the idea is to be the first at the finish line. What's interesting here is that you have laps, so what you have to do is board down the course, and then when you get to the end you'll see an entrance for a ski lift. Then you have to make sure you position yourself to make it through the gate and back to the top of the mountain for lap 2. If you miss the gate you'll hit a barrier and you could lose a valuable position. But that's alright, as there's plenty of power-ups you can get to help you with the race. There's 2 types of power-up, each one activated with a different button. You've got offensive ones like bombs, hands that push people over, parachutes that you can fire out to send people into the air, and frying pans that squish everyone. Then you've got more defensive or item style ones like a fan that gives you a speed boost, an invisibility cloak that makes you invincible, or rocks that you can drop behind you. You've got to earn the power-ups though. There's blue and red stalls that you have to run into to collect the power-ups, and each one costs 100 coins. You get coins by either just collecting them from the route or by doing tricks. Tricks are easy to do. You hold the jump button, but be careful as when you do you can't move. And when you're crouched you hold the direction that you want to spin. Then when you let go of the jump button you'll do the spin in that direction. You use the C buttons to do grabs, with each one grabbing the corresponding direction. You do also have super tricks you can do that are worth more money by doing movement combinations on the stick like left right left before you let go. And you can tell you've done it right because you'll get blue sparkles, and everyone likes blue sparkles. But these tricks of course need more air, so don't do them if you're jumping off of something small. If you don't have enough money and you hit a shop, you'll just fall on your ass. And the money that you have left over after races can be used to buy new boards, giving you better speed and control, which is always good. There's no real cups or anything here, instead each race is just its own thing. But the courses are very varied, from the usual mountains and grassy plains to cities and even a fun fair. Where this is a more cartoony game, they could really go crazy with the locations, and it works quite well, and I don't think there's any courses that I don't like. It's just a shame that there's so few of them, only 7 in total. This means you can play through them all in about an hour or so, and if you win them all on your first go, then you would have unlocked everything there is to unlock, which is a bit of a shame. A few more characters and levels would have gone a long way. But the game is really fun to play, especially with some friends. I used to have a blast playing this in 4-player, even though the frame rate does get a bit choppy, even in single player. The game looks decent with some good character models, though the characters are kind of ugly and not particularly designed well. You'll find your favourite soon. For me, it's Linda, as she's a decent all-rounder. I just never use Tommy, he's crap. Overall, this is an excellent racing game that's easy to pick up and play. There is a sequel that I've never played, and a DS game that I've also never played. This is one of those games that I'd like to see come back with a new game. Check it out if you can. Back to the Gamecube now, sorry it's been Nintendo heavy, for SSX Tricky, which was also released for the PS2 and Xbox, but I used to play a lot of Gamecube, so I've got the Gamecube version. This is one of the most popular snowboarding games out there, and I'm pleased to say it holds up really damn well. I've only played 2 of the SSX games, and they've both been pretty damn good. It's an over-the-top racing series filled with crazy characters, high-speed racing, over-the-top tricks, and arcade action. The games do not go for realism, and that's what makes them so damn fun to play. Yes, it's the usual here, you choose from a bunch of characters, each with stats, and then you choose from about 10 pretty varied courses, and then you choose if you want to race against the computer, go for a high score, or just practice. Then you go do that. The courses here are really fun to race on and take you all over the world to some strange places. They're packed with jumps all over the place, and it won't take long for you to be doing some crazy, completely over-the-top tricks off of them to rack up a high score, and I do like a good rack. As well as this though, doing tricks builds up your boost meter, which you can use by pressing B, but the higher you let the meter build, the better your boost will be, encouraging you to save it to use it when you really need it. If you let it get all the way up, then you'll enter Tricky mode, where you have access to your Uber moves. These are wacky moves that let you throw your board around all over the place, and you'll get massive points for the unrealistic ways you do it. If you manage to pull off an Uber trick, you'll get a letter starting to spell out the word tricky. Spell this and you get unlimited boost, which is great and sounds a bit broken, but it works well and you won't always be able to do this. The tricks themselves are easy to pull off with simple button combinations. The only things I didn't really like were grinds, which were done just by jumping onto the rail or branch or whatever you're grinding on, but it's actually really hard to do and the collision detection seems really poor. If you don't hit it exactly right, then you'll just miss it or bounce off it. I found that I didn't really bother with doing it after a few races. While on the courses, make sure you keep an eye out for the blue and red gates. These are showing you where the shortcuts are, and the colour tells you how easy they are. So the red one are the hard ones. These will be full of obstacles or tricky jumps, and the blue ones not so much. The red ones will give you a better shortcut if you manage to get through them unscathed. Of course, between races you can use points and money that you earn to buy new clothes and gear for your boarder, which will change your stats. So if you prefer speed over tricks, you can use a longboard, which are really damn fast but not very good for score, or vice versa with other boards. As mentioned, you'll also unlock more courses to race on and a load of new races. To add to the replay value, you also level up your characters with stat points that you earn in the races and trick modes. All the races level up individually, encouraging you to play through the game multiple times with each one. And this is something I didn't really mind, as the game is just so fun to play. When you're racing, you can also shove your opponents using the C-stick. Just push it in the direction you want to push. Knocking someone over gives you a full tricky meter, however you do have to be careful as riders will remember this and each one will have an affinity for you, so if you push someone over constantly, in the next race they'll go out of their way to make your life a misery. The game looks fantastic, it's got a really cool cartoony art style and doesn't take itself seriously at all. Each of the courses are all very different too, with snow, ice, grass and even roads to race on. The animation is super smooth and the gameplay and frame rate just make it feel amazing to play, and this is a game you can pick up and play in just a few minutes. But the more you play, the more little nuances you'll find. You can play this in 2 players, which is of course excellent, but it would have been nice to have a 4-player option. At least it would have been back in college when I had some friends that played video games with me. This game is a must for any of the systems that it's on, and if you don't already have it, then you really should add it to your collection. And finally for today, here is SSX for the Xbox 360, a sort of reboot released in 2012, which is sadly the last game that we've had in the series so far. This is a great continuation of the series though, that keeps the core gameplay of Tricky, and I'm assuming the other games that came after that and before this one, and it turns it all up to 11. And while I would say I do still prefer the Tricky game, this is still a hell of a fun time. This time round the characters and settings are all more based in reality, with some pretty boring and generic characters rather than the wacky cartoon ones we had before. In fact, I couldn't tell you a single one of them. They're instantly forgettable. Thanks, EA. So you choose your person and then a mountain from a selection of them, a lot of which will need to be unlocked as you play. Then when you're on that mountain, you've got a number of routes and races and events that you can take part in, so there's a fair amount of places to slide down and quite a few characters. Again, a lot of which will need to be unlocked. I like that. There's a few game modes depending on the route that you take. You have your standard race against a few other opponents, be the first to the bottom and you win. There's a trick attack where you have to get a high score. Sometimes there'll be other races on these as well, and you have to get a better score than they have by the time you get to the bottom. When you're doing these, don't worry about coming in first place, as that doesn't even matter. It's all about points, not position. There's also survival runs, which have more obstacles like trees and dangerous jumps, and you have to get to the bottom without depleting your health bar. Thankfully, the health bar is only present on certain events, so it's not a permanent thing. You can swap characters between each event, which is a nice touch, and again they can be leveled up, with some being more useful in certain events than others. And the points you earn also act as currency, so you can buy new gear, like boards, outfits and even armour to help you survive through the runs. And even a wingsuit which lets you glide for a short time. This is essential for getting over some of the bigger jumps and is a really cool addition. The game lets you wear whatever gear is required for each run, and even gives you an estimate on how likely you are to survive. This will change depending on your board, wingsuit, armour and so on, so you might need more speed or more spin for tricks, or to be able to jump further. This is handy, and sometimes you'll even want to attempt the courses with a low percentage so you can figure out what it is you actually need. This is kind of one of my gripes though, as I did find the shop and menu systems here to be really overly complicated, which really seems to be a thing in games now. There's so much crap to buy and unlock, and of course back in the day they also want you to spend real money to buy stuff faster. But it was hard to tell what you needed, where to buy it, what you already owned and what was equipped. I did get used to it all, but I really didn't find it intuitive. Thankfully you don't actually need to spend real money, as all the events can be played as much as you want, so it's not too hard to get the stuff you need, but it does mean you can be replaying the same event multiple times just to grind and get some money. Which is where all of the tricks come in. And the tricks here look amazing, and are super easy to pull off with combinations on the left and right analog sticks and a couple of buttons. The game is very forgiving with the landing and balance, which really makes it fun to play. It's also blisteringly fast, which can be good and bad. It's good because it looks awesome to watch when you're doing well, but there's also times where I didn't know what the hell was really going on and was just sort of hoping for the best. As you can see, SSX looks gorgeous with some awesome character models, great looking landscapes and some really nice lighting, and as I said, it all runs incredibly fast and smooth with some excellent controls that really make it a joy to watch and play. I do still prefer Tricky, but this is a really fun time and I would recommend adding this to the collection if you can. So there you go, 10 snowboarding games that you might want to bust out this winter. Which one is your favourite and what other ones could I have included? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us and we'll see you next time.